Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking some time out of what we know are very busy days and weeks for you to join us for this webinar. We are committed to keeping this webinar 30 minutes or less. So if you need to leave us before the webinar is over, as Brandy said, you'll be able to find a recording of the complete webinar on the members only website a short time after today. But what we want to do when we have everyone on the line is take a few minutes, 30, to go through some of the work that we've been doing from the national office with regards to youth engagement. So in this context, we really are thinking about teens when we speak about youth. What we'll do through the course of the next 30 minutes, thank you, is talk very briefly about why we think that the area of youth engagement is very important for our organization. I'm going to outline some of the innovative methods and tools that we've used in some current research, recent research that we've done in this area. Let you know a little bit very high level about what the key findings of the research have been. And some of those involve learning some tips and tricks of how to authentically engage youth from the voices of young people themselves. And we'll talk about how we collected those voices soon. And then just at the end, I'll also talk a little bit bigger picture about the next steps and where we see our youth engagement work going from the national office perspective to give you a sense of how some of this work might fit into the day-to-day work that you guys are doing in your clubs on the ground as well. So we'd like to sort of frame out what we mean by youth engagement when we're talking about the national office work and the context that we're doing it in. And we like to put up this comparison of, you know, the notion of working with youth versus engaging in youth engagement practices. So we often think of the traditional model of youth work looking more like responding to problems and preventing them, rather than with an eye to sort of positive development. So it's more reactionary than proactive. The notion traditionally that, you know, that our youth are our clients, that we look to sort of one-off projects or programs and services. I'm sure you all have experienced that kind of methodology when you get really interesting programs off the ground with short-term funding or contracts, which then unfortunately disappear after a short period of time, and you can't recreate them. And lastly, looking, you know, in the traditional model that us or the professionals are seen as experts who are working for young people and their communities rather than working with. So in the engagement model that we're looking at, we really are looking at youth as assets and really valuable components of every part of our organization. Certainly they are the ones that we want to be delivering programs to, but that they are vital and valuable in helping inform those practices as well. That the youth in our communities are active community members and that they have wisdom, skills, and expertise to bring to the table. And that rather than these short-term one-off projects, that we're looking at engagement as an ongoing process of empowerment, that we really want the youth engagement journey to be just that, a journey. It's not a short-term trip, that we're looking at building something together. And that our role in clubs is to act as a catalyst or a facilitator who are working with young people to help them achieve and attain their full potential rather than just being the experts who sort of plop in our own solutions to their issues. So the work that we've been doing at the national office around the youth engagement research piece has really been based on our outcomes framework, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with now. And so we've been looking to the outcomes of short-term youth engagement, being that our youth are feeling emotionally and physically safe, that they feel welcome, accepted, and valued and respected, that they are enjoying exploring new activities, that they're building relevant skills, and that the community, parents, and youth all together are engaged in their clubs and feel a real sense of ownership. And then we know obviously that those continue on into long-term participation and engagement outcomes as well. So we know that youth who feel that they're engaged, who feel that they belong and feel accepted and valued are the ones who have a sense of ownership in club space and activities and feel listened to, respected, and safe. So that's what we're saying through our outcomes framework. We know a little bit about the reality of how this all looks. And we know that long-term engagement and the outcomes that we hope to achieve through them really relies on more short-term experiences. So in order to get those long-term outcomes, we have to be able to keep them coming back for these short-term experiences, and that is sometimes where the challenge can lie. So we do know that lots of clubs have reported really struggling with engaging older youth. So again, youth, we're talking sort of the 13 and upwards group in this case. And there are a variety of reasons that we know that this can be true. So sometimes just the issues that our youth are facing, the barriers that they're facing in their day-to-day lives are really daunting and complex. And depending on the nature of your organization, your time, your resources, some of those issues can be really difficult to overcome within your club context. We also know that more generally that there's often a lack of program resources, training, and infrastructure when it comes to working relatively generally with youth. There's been a lot of emphasis, in the last 10 to 15 years on the earlier childhood age range, and a lot of focus and resources have been placed there. And we know that clubs sometimes struggle to find funding for programs for their older youth unless they're very specific sort of treatment or responsive programs. And we know as well, we'll put it on the table, that we face a bit of a branding problem, that some clubs, some youth within clubs turn their noses up a little bit when they hear the title or the name of the Boys and Girls Clubs, thinking that it connotes a younger age group, and that can be a challenge to having older youth come through the door. So we recognize that that's an issue as well. But we also know that many clubs are successful at authentically engaging youth, and we knew that we had a lot to learn from them. So what we did was undertook a research project that was based on the theoretical framework that we stole, that we borrowed from the Youth Program Quality Assessment Tool. Some of your clubs may be familiar with this tool, as we've been really promoting it as a great quality assessment tool that clubs can use for the programming that they deliver. But really it looks at the notion of youth engagement being like a pyramid, similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're familiar with that, this will look similar. So that, it's a pyramid or a ladder of engagement, and that there are things at the base that need to be in place for youth to be able to actualize some of the higher points on the pyramid. So the base being youth voice and governance, being where we hope to really establish things, but that none of the pyramid can happen really until you start building on the blocks of safe and supportive environments and working our way up that pyramid. So the pyramid itself identifies the program elements that we think need to be in place in order for youth to have the experiences that will help achieve some of those outcomes that we mentioned prior. And that when all of these elements are in place, youth will feel really motivated to participate in programs. And we'll come back to this pyramid a little bit later in the webinar. So when we undertook the research to learn from clubs that are doing youth engagement work really strongly, we wanted to really be able to fully and comprehensively understand what it is that's happening at those clubs that is or isn't working to help keep their youth coming through the doors. So the way that we chose to do this was by choosing 4 demonstration clubs. So 4 clubs were chosen to be our research subjects. Training was held for all of those clubs. Interviews were held with club staff, and what was decided on was a really participatory research approach where we actually trained youth leaders in each of those clubs to be peer researchers. So they were trained to facilitate focus groups and surveys with their peers. So they received training, tools, and support. They then set about, those youth in those clubs set about doing some youth recruitment and facilitating their focus groups and doing a photo voice project. We'll see the results of a bit of that. So the notion being that youth in clubs might be more willing to be open and frank about what brings them in or prevents them from coming into a club if it was one of their peers who was facilitating the process themselves. So what we have as a result of this research now is a booklet that's available both in hard copy and online to all clubs, and we're actually making it available more broadly to the public as well. So it's our National Youth Engagement Promising Practices for Authentic Youth Engagement booklet. And it's really, at this point, sort of a high-level summary of this research project and what the youth had to say about what needs to be in place for a youth to be authentically engaged. This was done certainly with the Boys and Girls Club context, but we think that the perspective and the view that the youth have promoted is one that's applicable to many youth-serving organizations and programs across the board. So what the booklet then identifies is a bit of a youth lounge metaphor as a way to talk about the different elements that need to be in place for authentic youth engagement to be happening. So the youth lounge represents the club as a whole, and the contents of the lounge reflect the different elements of a club's youth engagement plan. Because we really do, we'll talk, comes up at the end, but we really do suggest creating a plan for youth engagement. It doesn't tend to just happen. You need to be thoughtful, meaningful, and methodical about how you put engagement practices into play. So the contents of the lounge we'll talk about just briefly. So if you want more detail, we encourage you to access that booklet either online or in hard copy. So the different areas of the lounge that are talked about through this metaphor are the IPOD dock, which represents the atmosphere of a club and how we make youth feel comfortable and relaxed and safe. The couch sitting area, which represents what a club does to reflect on practice and develop new ideas. Posters is about sort of setting the brand, so how you make your club, your youth programming seem appealing to youth, and you know, put your programming in a youth-friendly brand and identity. The resource cupboard, which talks about the equipment, resources, and funds that you need to have to engage youth. The bookshelf is learning materials and staff and youth leaders. That the staff and youth leaders will be using to support the development of the program. And lastly, the calendar. So as we mentioned, we really hope that the clubs will have an intentional, organized, and sequenced approach to youth engagement. And so, you know, not necessarily the notion of having set dates for everything, but that it should be a progressive journey that builds upon its previous experiences. So some of the key findings that came out of this research project were that some of the elements of that YPQA pyramid from the voices of the youth were more pertinent to them than others. So what was really most important to them, though I think that they would all agree that safety would be important, in terms of engagement, the most key parts to them were the notions of authenticity and atmosphere, that you could have the safest club in the world, but if we didn't authentically listen to them, if the atmosphere was too childlike or too oppressive, that they wouldn't be inclined to continue to participate. Sorry, if you can go back just 1 second. Sorry, and then again, the notion that authenticity is really key. So we know that clubs often struggle with the very top piece of the pyramid, which was true youth engagement, and the very base of the pyramid, which is youth governance. So the authenticity piece really came to play in, if we're going to ask youth for their input, if we're going to ask them for ideas, for their feedback, that putting those pieces into play rather than just making them a lip service activity are difficult, but the most important piece to making the youth engagement work happen. So the next few slides that we have just talk a little bit more in depth about this metaphor and what it might mean to your programming. So the first one is the notion of the iPod dock. So we chose this metaphor with the understanding, you know, that music in general is a great way to set a mood, and that an iPod dock with speakers can let youth feel comfortable and feel represented in what they're seeing and hearing. So it really does represent for us the atmosphere of a club, which is really important for making youth feel comfortable and safe. So we want we would hope that in an authentic youth engagement context, Your spaces would be approachable and fun and have non-judgmental staff who are listening, caring, and meaningfully interacting with the youth, that it sort of can feel like a home away from home where they know that they can relax, maybe leave some of the challenges, turmoil, and issues that they're facing in their day-to-day lives outside of the club at the gate a little bit, and know how to bring those issues in a responsive way that can be dealt with when they need to come inside the doors of your club. That it offers an opportunity for making friends and for social atmospheres, and that ultimately they feel safe and secure there. So really the notion of the IPOD doc just highlights how the atmosphere of your club really influences your ability to do youth engagement. We know that, sometimes your youth programming might be happening in a space that is often dedicated to early childhood programming, because that's the space that you have available at the moment. So it's about thinking, about what you can do to set that atmosphere and make it more appealing to youth. Because we learned that the youth don't just care about what a club has to offer, but what it does to make them feel safe and respected. And there's a quote there from one of our clubs, from one of the club youth about what that means to them. So this is a little sample from the photo voice. So the photo voice method asks youth to go out and take pictures that represent some of the aspects of the club that are important to them, and in this case from the youth engagement perspective. So this young person from the St. John Club said this was a picture of me and some of my friends. Means a lot to me because these are the people I hang out with every day, and my friends make me come to the club, and I know if I'm upset or have a problem, they're there for me. So it's about setting the atmosphere. The next area is the couch sitting area. So it's about taking a moment to sit and kick up your feet, to reflect on practices and refresh with new ideas. So it's about what a club can do to reflect on what you're doing and develop new ideas in the future. So this would be more, times of more spontaneous gathering, offering regular opportunities for input, again, in a meaningful and authentic way. Things like suggestion boxes, youth councils, youth forums, having youth representatives at the club who might sit on boards, things like that, opportunities for authentic listening, and then feeding back some of that feedback into staff meetings. So, we don't want to get into the trap where the only people hearing the feedback of youth are the youth workers on the front line, and some of those ideas and suggestions don't have the opportunity to get fed back up into the higher management of the club to be able to enact some of those suggestions. So really the couch sitting area is about highlighting that authenticity is exceptionally important to youth. They feel like their ideas may not be taken seriously all the time, and if that occurs, they're far less motivated to continue to participate in programs. The next section is posters. So it's about making a room look appealing and attractive so that the youth want to spend time there. So here we're talking about a club's youth engagement brand. So just for the record, Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada has no problem with you sort of sub-branding your own youth programming as you see fit to engage youth in your programs. We know lots of clubs have youth zones or different youth spaces that they've named with different titles, and that's fine by us, whatever helps get those youth through the door. So we know that it's about creating spaces where youth can experience self-expression, that the youth is the brand of the space in that, at least in that confined period of time when they're there. We know that there's an importance of having an online presence, and if you're going to be using social media or online techniques to outreach to youth, that there's a certain way that that outreach should look and feel in order to be effective in reaching the youth that you hope to. It's about having accessible hours, certainly, so we heard a fair bit from youth about, when the club is open for them versus when are good times for them, and those two things don't always coincide, so it's an interesting piece to consider as well. So here it's about highlighting the need for youth-only spaces whenever possible, and certainly youth-centered approaches and outreach. That the way that you promote your programs to 7-year-olds might not work for the way that you're promoting them to 17-year-olds, and that part is important to continue. And there's another quote there. So I just saw that we have a couple questions pop up. Just so you know, we'll answer those questions at the end of the webinar, but we'll make sure that they're addressed. So this is another piece from the photo voice. I'll just give you a few seconds to read that yourselves. So the next part of our metaphor is the resource cupboard. So it's about the tools and items that you have at the ready to successfully engage in youth. So we're talking about equipment, resources, and funding, you know, at its core to engage in a way that, that youth will respond to. So ideally your programs are accessible financially to youth, are in an accessible location, that you may have employment and volunteer opportunities at your club for youth and sort of paths within your club where they might be able to achieve employment either within your club or within your network. We know that incentives are always good, food, bus passes, condoms, other prizes that relate to other programming. Youth-only spaces and leadership opportunities. Leadership opportunities is a big one. We know that youth really thrive on that sense of ownership. So here in this section, we're really highlighting that in order to both become and remain engaged, youth need a variety of opportunities and experiences, that it's not really a one-size-fits-all. You want to appeal to as many youth with as many diverse interests as possible, and we understand that that takes that what incentivizes that, what serves as an incentive will be different, and what kinds of programming and offerings are appealing, or employment opportunities or leadership opportunities, that what those things will, which of those things will be appealing to youth depends on the youth themselves, and that there's no cookie-cutter approach to what works best. And our bookshelf is about valuable learning materials. So we know that there's a wealth of literature out there about best practices for youth engagement. So it's how we make some of that information relevant, accessible to the staff who are doing the frontline work with your youth in their clubs, and that they're able to use that information to support their programs and embed some of those best practices. And then lastly, the calendar. So we mentioned the notion of sequenced, meaningful, intentional, and organized work to make this happen. Ad hoc attempts at youth engagement may work on an ad hoc basis, but if we're looking at some form of some sense of continuity of long-term engagement so that we're helping them achieve some of those long-term outcomes, there really needs to be thought put into sort of how that journey happens and how that progress happens. And once you better understand what's working, you can take a step back and really think of an outline about how to facilitate the process of youth engagement in your club. So what we pose to everyone at the end of this kind of, albeit short little piece, is to think about what you might be able to be doing differently today or next week or in 6 months to maybe take a shift in how you're currently doing your youth engagement work, and think about how you might enhance some of the work that you're doing already. We don't certainly expect that out of this, the last 20 minutes that we've been just doing the really high-level overview of this research, that it all becomes, super clear. The booklet is available. If you want to go deeper than just the high-level summary that's offered in the booklet, you can also contact us and we can give you some more of the nuts and bolts of the research findings and outcomes as well, which we're still in process sort of finalizing into a shiny document. A couple of the next steps, I don't have a slide for this one, but just so that you all know sort of where we're going with this work from now on. So we at the national office are still in the sort of mid-stages of finalizing our new strategic plan, which will set the vision for the organization for the coming years. And youth engagement and accessing more youth, providing programming to more youth, and engaging youth in more meaningful ways across the board, both at the national office level and right down through to clubs, is going to be a pervasive theme throughout the new strategic plan. So we're really seeing that the needs and the interests of youth are coming to the forefront within the organization, which is great, and we'll be looking to implement some new strategies and tactics from sort of an activities point of view for how to achieve that. Part of that is that we will be looking to host a youth engagement or youth work training facilitated by the National Programs Department at the National Office, hopefully within the next, I would say, 6 months or so. So we'll be looking at some of the results of this research and talking as a group about how we can really implement this within your specific club context on the ground. So you can look for more information on that coming soon. You'll also, if any of your clubs have been taking part in the peer review peer review system, you may notice that there is sort of a lens now in the programming standards section of the peer review that looks at really engaging youth and working with youth and teens as well. So that's sort of an overall view of where we are and where we're going. And again, this booklet, the Youth Engagement Promising Practices booklet, is available on the BGCC website. If you're interested in hard copies of it for any of the work that you're doing, maybe with some of your community partners, or however you may see it fit, feel free to get in touch with us and we can get you some copies. So it's, again, available via PDF on the website.